on behalf of the Institute for Leadership and Strategic Foresight, welcome to So You Want to Be the Chief, a podcast for leaders.
Well, it's always a pleasure to see my little brother, Chief James Seballes, who is my guest today. We always have a little bit of fun, and maybe we even learn about each other or others. Not that we talk about others, but we talk about others in a good way. But anyway, Chief James Seballes, who is a Space Force chief and just retired a couple of weeks ago, I think, something like that.
That's right.
And you can tell he's retired because he's got a beard growing already. But you're going to be taking that off pretty quick because you're coming back to work, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, got to go make some money.
Got to go make, yeah, right. Sure. Anyway, yeah, and it's funny, Chief, because of especially non-chiefs think that you can live on the chief retirement pay, and it's not bad, but it's still, you got to get out there and do make at least a couple of bucks, because it just doesn't equate to what you were making before, or the economy or whatever. So, and I don't know, for me, and as you know, I'm retired twice, although I keep telling people I did not retire, I refired, because I'm doing just as much, if not more, as I was when I was getting paid to do it. And now I don't get paid to do it, but I still do it. So, but anyway, congratulations on your retirement, Chief. And
thank you.
I'm proud of you making it all the way to the top, because we met when you were a tech sergeant, I think.
That's right.
A couple of years ago. I don't even remember. But you went through the ranks as a space type person, right? Or Intel? What did you do?
I'm Intel by trade.
Okay.
But 7 of my first 11 years in service, I was in space. And so I had a space background well before the Space Force existed. I was pretty well versed in it, but my trade is specifically Intel.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when Space Force came on board, you just shifted? Is that how that worked? Or did you have to apply, or how did that? You weren't drafted,
Yes.
Were you?
No, I wasn't drafted. But so when the Space Force got stood up, those that were Space Force specialties that grew up in Air Force Space Command, those that in the Air Force, 13 Sierra for the officers, 1 Charlie 6 for the enlisted guys and gals. Those folks had the choice to either come over or go back into the Air Force and get retrained. And so for Intel and Cyber, which were the other broad specialties that were decided to be a part of the Space Force, we did have to apply. And there was a process. There was a board process that took place where they evaluated records and did all those things. And then they had a second board, if you will, or a second stage of the board that was done at the headquarters. And so that process, as you imagine, took a few months. And so for me, I think it took probably about 6 months from the time I applied before the time I was notified that I'd been selected.
Yeah. Okay.
But the shift wasn't easy. Even though I had a background in space, I'd been in the Air Force for 26 years when I shifted over. And so it wasn't a quick decision. And kind of, on the topic that I think we're going to discuss today of trust, I had some really good mentors, both enlisted and officer, that I reached out to that I trusted to give me sage counsel. And then above all, my wife, Daisy, who, I bounced a bunch of things off and kind of, what this meant. And after a little thinking through and talking with those folks, it was a no-brainer, and I was extremely fortunate to have been selected.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we say, Chief, that once a chief, always a chief, regardless of and I think the Space Force has incorporated some like soldiers and Marines, sailors. Have they come
Correct.
into? Okay, so and I don't know how many of those are actually chiefs, or E9s, I guess, because they may have the different designation, but. Being a chief is, you're the leader, at least to the enlisted corps, and many times to everybody, but at least the enlisted corps. And as you say, we want to talk about lesson number 8, which is build trust. I hate to say it, but I have served with some people that I could not trust. It sucked living in that environment. I don't know, the term that we use now is toxic. And I don't know I don't know really what that means. other than it sucked working with those people that you could not trust. And then not so much because they were bad or anything. They just, maybe incompetent. You couldn't trust that they could do it right because they didn't know how to do it. Right. A lot of things that go into it. But in the book, I mentioned, I think there's 8 topics that take 8 parts of building trust. But nonetheless, trust, I think, is what that's the glue that keeps the team together.
That's right. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you. I think when you're in situations where you don't trust people, whether it's competence or dependability, it does suck. It causes a lot of internal, I'll say reflection, because at least for me, I have a tendency to want to trust first, right? To always assume noble intent with our individuals, and when you do that, but yet you're continually either let down, or the people again don't come through, or it, going down the toxic path, it does become adversarial, and it sucks. It sucks because we're all on the same team, and we should all be rowing in the same direction, going after the same goal. And when you find somebody, especially, well, I should say especially, but regardless of the rank, it makes it difficult. And people feel that, right? Even if they don't see it, people feel it. And I've found myself in a couple of situations like that where, one of my teammates that I didn't trust was at my level, was a fellow chief. And even though people didn't see the things that I saw, I could tell it was felt based on, like you touched on in your book, and you referenced it multiple times in chapter 8, acknowledging presence. And I one of the highlights of my day as a chief was when I got to break away from a meeting or my desk, and I got to go see people and go talk to them and say hi to them. And you can feel it just based on their actions, based on their questions. And it does. It's a tough thing. It really does erode the fabric of an organization if there's no trust within it.
Yeah, and I think in what we do, Chief, I mean, if when we think about it, I don't know, most of us, I don't think invest much time in thinking about what we do. The term that we use, or the phrase that we use, is defend the country. Okay, defend the country. What does that mean? Well, to defend the country, we have to be willing to do what we have to do, and even to the point of giving our life to defend the country. And I that old saying about the ultimate sacrifice, dying for your country. That's a hard thing, I think, philosophically, to get your head around, because dying for something that really is as big as the country. I don't know that we're big enough to get that, but dying for our buddies, dying for our teammates, we can understand that pretty quickly. And I think what you're saying with people feeling whether they can trust you or not, that's a spiritual thing. We don't want to talk about spiritual stuff for some reason. It's, that's taboo, which I think is ridiculous, but it is a spiritual thing. You can feel that spirit of the person. This person is willing to die for me. That's huge, man. I mean, that's really deep. Yeah. Now that you're going to be a retiree, and we haven't talked about what you're going to be doing next, but going into a different world, really, because all of the 30 years in the Air Force and then Space Force, and now you're going to go live and work in a different type of a context. It's going to be different. Because the people out there, I'll say out there, are not necessarily willing to die for you. It's a business,
right.
And the business means making money. I mean,
that's right.
By definition, I remember having arguments with some CEOs about, no, that's not what we're here for. Okay, well, if you weren't making money, would you still be here? Well, no. There you go. I rest my case. Where we, and I mean, 30 years, Chief, that's a lifetime. We've been doing this together for 30 years, and now you got to make a shift, which when we talk about trust is going to be a little bit different. But it doesn't really matter, I don't think, whether it's in the military or in the civilian world. You got to be able to trust each other, and I'm not sure that we do in our society right now, brother. It's crazy, but sometimes I'm fearful of just going. I don't go to concerts. I'm a musician, as you are, and I don't go to concerts because I don't trust the people that are going to these concerts. Stuff that happens. You know,
Yeah.
it's sad, but
Yeah,
it's
no,
true.
it is. And, I think it's even more of a challenge today, right? Because at least in my opinion, we have so much access to information today, whether it's social media or anything that comes through one of the devices that we're on. I mean, heck, the thing that we're doing today, even, right? Being able to have a video conference and do something like this, like a podcast, like that didn't exist 30 years ago when I came into the service. Like you couldn't do that. You had to go talk to people. And it's created the option for people to not necessarily have to truly connect with people. I have friends that would rather send a text, rather send an email than actually go to a location and go speak to somebody. It's just the way our society has now formed around this digital transformation. And so when you talk trust, trust, at least in my opinion and how I was raised, it was built through connection, through getting to know one another and talking and breaking bread, as you and I have done many a time, and just being around folks. And when you can't do that, and you live in the bubble that you live in on a social media platform or just world, it makes it harder to go out there. To your point, right? It makes it harder. I mean, it's a sad thing. My youngest came home. This is probably about a year and a half ago. Came home from school, and they had to do an active shooter drill, and I had to explain to my 12-year-old. He was 12 at the time. What that meant, and he just didn't understand. Like, why would people just randomly do things like that? And so all these different things, kind of erode at that trust and that comfort to be able to go out there, and it makes it that much more difficult to connect with folks. Which, as I said, I believe is a big piece of building that trust in folks.
Yeah. And I contend, Chief, that the best way, the most powerful way that we learn and teach is through modeling. And to what you're saying, we, especially my generation, we used to watch people. We didn't have this technology, so we watched them physically doing stuff or not doing stuff, which gave us that spirit, that feeling of trust or not trust, whatever the opposite is, because it was there. We were there. The 2 or 3 or whatever people were right there, not only watching it but learning from it. And this is what you did because Dad did it, or Abuelo did it. It was just the family that did it. However, it may have been extended or not. But that doesn't happen anymore because we do have the technology. And we don't have the Chief Bob Gaylor. God bless his soul, just passed away a few months ago. He taught me that high tech will never replace high touch. And I think that high touch is very well connected to trust. It's that whatever that, and again, I call it spirit, that when two people are together, you feel that it's right there. And,
That's
and
right.
you can teach and you can learn with modeling. And I know you have 3 boys, and I'm sure they've learned a lot of good stuff from you and Daisy by being there, not just connecting or texting. And I mean, it's even on social media. You can put a picture of anybody and say, "Hey, this is me," and you
That's
don't
right.
really know whether it's me. I can't even imagine how many. That imposter syndrome. I bet you there's about a bunch of people out in social media with my picture on their Facebook page saying, "This is me." When you're ruggedly handsome, it's a curse, man. It's a curse, I tell you.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And it's something that in my experience, it takes work for both sides. And what I mean by that is, when growing up, I remember, again, the first unit I was in, you didn't see the chief that often. And my first chief was Chief Gary Fines, and he was a 30-year chief who retired back in '97. And as a young, I might have been a one striper. when he retired, maybe an A1C. When you did see him, and he was the chief. His uniform back in those days when we wore BDUs and they were pressed, polished, his haircut, like he looked like what you thought a chief should. And then when you did see a few of them around base, same. Like I never saw a chief at my very first duty station that I'm like, that's a chief. Like you never did that. And so everything that they kind of represented, whether it was in uniform, or even what they said, right? Again, when you didn't see him come into our flight office that often, but he did, and he'd take a few minutes to kind of chat with us and, hey, how you doing? Good afternoon, and talk. Like you saw it and you felt it. Like, hey, this is somebody of significance to our service. You felt the years of experience in it, and you can't get that through social media. You can't get that through hitting a like button. You have to be out there in front. And where I say it's worked both ways is I think, again, in today's age, right, going back down the trust, I think our junior folks have gotten to the point where they see things online, and they, a lot of us chiefs, me included, you have a social media presence, you're putting things out there, and you kind of create this image, maybe even a facade to a certain extent of who you are. When those junior people see you walking around, if it even for a second doesn't look like what they think you are online, you've just kind of broken that trust. And it takes some time for them to trust and understand, like, okay, maybe I just caught them on a bad day. And it's mutual work both ways. One of my war stories, if you will, that I remember very vividly, when I was a squadron superintendent, and I was a 2-time squadron superintendent. So my first squadron, we had an ops floor with about 100 folks on any given shift. And so I used to make a point to randomly come in really early or stay late or middle of the day, just to kind of catch people different times and catch as many different people as I could. And I remember going to one section and talking to a few folks, and one individual in particular, I asked, I was like, hey, how you doing? How's it going? And you kind of touch on this in your book, right? If you're not really focused on that individual, if you're not listening to them, they can tell, right? You talk about saying good morning versus like, how's it going? Because that response is going to take time from you, especially if they trust you. And, I've always believed that when I ask people this, and this is just through my experiences, when I ask them, hey, how you doing? I come with that intent to listen. If they're going to give me more, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to listen to them. And I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to be focused just on them. Because I can tell you, I remember even as an NCO, having some chiefs kind of sit, hey, how you doing, James? And they talk to me. And as I'm talking back, they're looking around. Mm-hmm. And I never know what they were looking for, but they would be looking around. So they're clearly not listening. They're not focused on me. And so I would always make a point. I'm going to be focused. I'm going to bring energy, because maybe they need that energy. Again, going back to my story with Chief Fines, like when he came in, he had a presence, he had energy, he had a smile on his face. Just, when he came in, he never, James, this job sucks. So the commander, this, the shirt, that, like it wasn't that. That may have been going on, but you didn't feel it. And so, and then the last thing is I always try to make sure that no matter who I spoke to, that relationship, even if it was just built over 5 minutes, is future focused. I can't wait to see you again. Please send me a note. Please come by my office anytime. Don't worry about my exec. Just walk on in. Come on by. And I would do those things. And so I did that in this instance. I asked a young man, hey, how's it going? He talked to me a little bit about ops. He showed me some of the things he was working on. And that was it. And I sat and I was like, hey, anything else? He's like, no, I'm good. I'm like, all right. So I left. Well, I went upstairs to where his leadership was, and just to kind of let them know, right? Because they're going to tell, hey, the chief was by here. And I didn't want them thinking I was, coming to task people, or if I was in their section, like, again, I want to have trust with the leadership to know that if I'm coming around, I'm purely just coming to check on, see how things are going, not checking on them per se. But I would go back up there to say, hey, I was down there. And if I heard good, bad, and different, kind of pass that along, because sometimes, they'll tell the chief something different than they'll tell their team. And so I said, hey, I spoke to this one staff sergeant. Seems like he's a really sharp guy. Showed me some of the things he's working on. Said everything's going great. And his flight chief looks at me, Chief, like his world is like falling apart. Like he has all these different things going on, and like not work related, but just personal. And I'm like, man, I sat there with him for probably 10 minutes, just talking to him. And even at the end of I don't know if it was trust, maybe it was comfort, or maybe it's just, who knows? People will never tell you everything that they got going on, but I made a mental note that I was going to come back. And I did the next week when he was on the same shift, and I did the same thing. And he still didn't tell me any of the personal things. And I didn't take that as distrust. I took that as, maybe he just doesn't want his chief, not me. I'm not thinking of me as bigger than something else, but he just didn't want his chief knowing that about him. He was good with his team. And as long as they told me that he was taken care of, they were looking after him, he was just going through a tough time, I felt that, the only thing I could do at that time was just be there with him, just talk with him, keep him focused on some of the other, because clearly that was where he wanted to share those were the things operationally he wanted to share with me. And, I hope that, it did build trust for him and me or other senior leaders behind me that, hey, I did care. Even if he didn't tell me all those details. I felt comfortable knowing that his team was taking care of him and he was at least being honest with them. But I still made it a point to come and check on him from time to time. And just, I wouldn't dig on purpose unless they told me, because I wanted to respect their space. But sometimes trust looks like that as well, right? It doesn't always have to be that they pour out their soul to you, but that time, that touch, as you said, that Chief Gaylor said, man, it's irreplaceable. Yes. And we as humans, everybody needs it.
Yeah. And a lot of times I think, as particularly as a new chief, Chief, is that we're trying to measure whether we're being effective or not. But especially in this type of environment, I don't know that you can. You being there or that you're available, it may be enough. I don't need the chief. I don't need to talk to him, but I know he's there. And
that's right.
If I ever do need him, I can go talk to him and he'll listen to me. And I think that's that's part of being trustworthy. That's really what I want to talk. I try to talk about in the book, is that you have to be trustworthy for trust to exist. But that doesn't mean you don't have a scorecard. Well, okay, I did this, I did that. Well, you can, I guess, if you want, but that makes no sense. And every individual is different. Some of them do come, and you've had them, I'm sure, do come and talk to you all the time about all kinds of things. What is that, TMI? I don't even want to know about this stuff. That's leave it somewhere else. Go talk to somebody else. But and then there are others that really don't have to share too much, but they know that you're right there if they need you. And again, that goes back to modeling, again, the key in that lesson, I think, is that we have to be trustworthy. When we talk about trust, when I do my seminars on trust, I ask people what define trust. And 99% of the folks that will stand up and talk about it will say, well, it's when somebody does this, or when somebody does this, or when it's, those external things. Okay, that's fine. But really the key, especially as a chief, is, are you doing those things? Are you trustworthy? Should people trust you? And that changes the perspective. And you've been in some of those workshops that I've done. It changes when you have to internalize it. Well, do I do it or not? And again, there's no criteria. There's no checklist. It gets back to what you said. It's a feeling, a spirit that exists between us. And again, in the business, in the profession that we're in, we got to have it. Man, if I'm hurting, I can go see the chief. And the chief may not know the answer, and especially a new chief, you may not know the answer. And I've always said, and it's one of the lessons in the book, you don't know everything. But if you're a good chief, you know everyone. I don't know anything about this, but I know someone who does. Let me refer you. Let me call, or let me make an appointment for you. So there are a lot more things that are involved in developing and maintaining trust than you probably will see.
That's right. No, and I think you hit on something in the book, and you just hit it again right now. I think the one of the core pieces to building trust is relationships. And not just with your people and those that you lead and those you serve, but just others in the formations across the base or institution, whether they're in uniform or out. To your point, if you have a problem, but I know who I can get to solve this, right? That relationship with those people is just as important. And something that I've talked about at senior NCO PEZs and inductions and things like that, and I reemphasize it anytime a chief asks or I get a chance to speak to chiefs, is build relationships before you meet them, right? As the chief, you touch on it in your book, like everybody probably knows who you are. You're the chief. You may not know everybody in your unit, depending on how big that organization is. And your goal is to try and obviously know those people, but building those relationships with others that can maybe help you kind of pull each other along, I think are critical. And they've served me really, really well over the years, building relationships with people across the base. I used to have a first sergeant that used to joke and say, nobody thinks about COM, CE, and those support type functions until you need them.
Yeah.
And that always
finance. Don't forget finance. That airman over there at finance.
That's right. That's right. Until you need them, right? Well, then when you need them, of course, then they're your best friend. But if you build a relationship beforehand, those kinds of things empower you to do great things. And as a chief, over the years, there's been situations going back to building trust with their junior folks. I think nothing for me personally can be more frustrating when, I've gone to someone and they say, "Oh, I got you. Let me do this." And they come back, "I'm sorry that, I couldn't figure it out." Okay. Not everybody knows everything. And maybe you just don't have the authority to do some of those things. But then if I can go and dig into the information and find it on my own, well, then that causes me to lose trust in those that said they would help me. If they couldn't help me because they just didn't put in the work, they didn't have the relationships, or just didn't take time to know things beyond their sphere of influence. I think that's something, right? If someone comes to you and says, "Hey, Chief, can you help me?" And I was like, "You know what? I can't, but let me figure that out and I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you today or tomorrow, whenever, is appropriate." And then I call the right people, and we as chiefs come together to kind of move mountains and make things happen. That one, and you and I have talked about this in different contexts, but I still remember you saying it's not about the masses, it's about the one. If you can make a difference for that one individual, that is so powerful, because not only will they trust you, but and I know, having been an airman, and we were junior airmen at one point in time, like nothing gets through the dorms and through the ops floor, through the sections quicker than one airman telling another airman about what the chief did or didn't do.
Yep.
And so that all comes back to relationships. And then now you have an advocate. You have an advocate in your organization that can help foster trust and build the culture of trust within your organization. And it's extremely powerful. All starts with relationships, in my opinion.
Yep. Well, it's an ongoing thing, Chief. None of us is ever going to nail it, I don't think. But and we were talking earlier before we started the podcast, the difference between will and skill, and you need both of them. But in my opinion, you got to have a little bit more will than skill. You can learn how to do certain things, but you got to be willing to do it, and that's what makes us different, I think. Than I'll say it. I'll say it publicly. We're better than civilians. I said it. Okay. Well, our purpose is different. Like I said, we're here to save each other's lives, and that's a little bit different. So last couple of minutes, what can you tell a brand new chief? There's a brand new chief, Seballes. Unfortunately, I was not there. Well, I was there for your induction because I spoke at your induction.
You did.
But I didn't get to work with you because you wouldn't let me in that big ball thing where you had to jack me up and everything. So I wasn't there to mentor you as much as I wanted to. But last bit of advice for a brand new chief.
Oh, wow. I mean, there's so many things. And you touch on it in the book a little bit. I would tell a chief to be well read and to be okay with making mistakes. And why those two things in particular? And there's so many different things that I would tell a brand new chief, but being well read on things, one, empowers you to be able to think, to kind of think through things, maybe again, kind of before they happen, or even reflect on things and decisions that you've made. Well-read empowers you to be able to speak up and out, not just down. Reading the things that like your leaders are reading. And I'm not just talking about books and literature, but I'm talking about like, in the Air Force and Space Force and really across the DoD, you've probably heard there's a big shift towards great power competition and preparing for war with China. Okay, well, but what does that mean to you as a brand new chief where you sit? How do you relate and translate that to your squadron? And reading and understanding all the things that your senior leaders are reading helps you empower that. Now, then your job is then to translate, interpret that, translate down and across to all your folks in your unit. And it helps you shape, how you approach things, up or down. And so being well-read on all the things that you have going on in your service, again, as a chief, you're not the technical expert anymore. You're the strategic expert. Now you have familiarity with the tactical and the operational, but strategic is where you're most, I don't say most needed, but that's where your impact is meant to be. And so you do that by being well-read, well-versed, and then taking time to think through that. And so, I think that's just one of the critical things. Because again, it goes right back to what I was saying before. It empowers you to be able to take care of your folks. And then the second thing, as I said, be okay with making mistakes. I've said multiple times, and I've said this to chiefs and senior NCOs multiple times over, leadership is about making decisions other people have to live with. And sometimes you don't make the right decision, but you don't know that at the time. In the moment, you may think that you have all the information, as you talked about in your book, and then maybe there's something that's missing, or you just hadn't gone through something like that before, and you take time later to reflect and think on all the things. And it's okay to say, man, you know what, that I screwed that up before. The key is to learn from that mistake, but own it. And, I'll tell you one quick war story where I was in a situation like that, where as a senior NCO, I made a decision that unfortunately resulted in a young man getting separated from the Air Force a couple of years after that event. And in the moment when I made the decision that I did, it felt like the right decision. And I had trusted that his leadership was going to do some other things. It was contingent, in fact, on them doing some other things, so that 2 years later, he wouldn't have found himself in a situation where he's now getting separated, despite him wanting to continue to serve. And I one of the hardest things that I had to do was go and see the guy, shake his hand, and I just said, "Hey, my apologies. If I could do it all over, I'd do it a little bit differently." And he was an amazing human being, because he could have been completely frustrated and angry with me. He could have not shook my hand. He could have not talked to me. He could have said some choice words if he wanted to, but he didn't. And he thanked me for the decision that I made. He understood that it wasn't all my fault. It was, but either way, going through that, taking time to reflect and say, "Oh man," and just owning that mistake, but learning from it was so critical. Because I found myself, as I'm sure you did as a chief, maybe 80% of the decisions I made, I would make again. Those other 20%, I'll scrutinize till the day I pass away, because I'll sit there and I'm like, man, was I right? Could I have done it differently? Because, hindsight's a beautiful thing, and then once you get a little bit more experience, you take some time, and it's 2, 3, 4 years later, you look back, man, when I was a brand new chief, why did I do that? But it's okay. Again, you're going to make those mistakes. Be well-read, be well-versed, so you can take care of your troops. You can speak intelligently up and down, and then learn from those mistakes, and don't be afraid to make them. Yeah. And that would be what I would pass to any brand new chief.
Yeah. Great words, Chief. And as I said at the beginning, I'm so proud of what you've become and all the stuff that you've done. Because at your retirement ceremony, everybody was talking about how great you were. At first I was wondering who. I'm just kidding. I followed you. I followed you enough to know that you did well. And I know you're a good family man. You take care of your boys and your bride, and you're going to continue to do great stuff. I just look forward to seeing what you do. Whenever you run for president, I'll be right there helping you out. So
Sounds great.
God bless you, man. Thank you for taking the time to be on the show.
Same.
And we'll stay in touch. And we gotta have lunch. You owe me lunch.
We
Don't
do.
forget. You owe me lunch.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Okay. Now we have evidence. God bless you, brother.
Same to you, brother.
How about them Cowboys?
Yes, sir.